Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be introducing trigonometry ratios. First, let's go over some vocabulary. We're going to be discussing the next three words: adjacent, opposite, and hypotenuse. Adjacent we represent with an A, and that means next to. Opposite we represent with an O, and that means across. And finally, hypotenuse we represent with an H, and that's the longest side across from the 90-degree angle. It's always important to identify the adjacent, opposite, and hypotenuse of a right triangle. Now let's apply those vocabulary words. So we're going to identify our central angle, and that's going to be our angle B. So I always put an arc there, or you can put a star. Let's identify adjacent side. The adjacent side of this triangle, when my central angle is at B, is going to be CB. That is next to the central angle B. The opposite side is all the way across, and that's going to be AC. And of course, my hypotenuse is across from my 90-degree angle, and it's the longest side. So that's going to be side AB. Let's look at the next question. Label the appropriate sides as adjacent, opposite, and hypotenuse with respect to the marked acute angle. So for this question, our marked acute angle is angle F. Pause the video now and figure out which side is adjacent, opposite, and hypotenuse, and label on the triangle. So if my central angle is at F, I know opposite is across. So opposite would be DE. Adjacent would be the side right next to the central angle, and of course, across from the 90-degree angle is my hypotenuse. It's always important to label opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse in terms of the central angle. Next, we are going to discuss trig ratios, and we're going to use the acronym SOHCAHTOA. What this means is sine is a trig function, and the acronym we use is SO, opposite over hypotenuse. The next trig function we use is cosine, and that's represented by CA, adjacent over hypotenuse. Lastly, the next trig function we use is tangent, which we represent as TOA, opposite over adjacent. SOHCAHTOA is extremely important, and we use these trig functions, sine, cosine, and tangent, to find missing sides or angles in a right triangle. Next, let's look at this example, identifying sides of a right triangle with respect to a given right angle. So first, let's identify our central angle. And of course, it's going to be at A because that's where the arc is. After we identify the central angle, we must label opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse on the triangle. So opposite is across, adjacent is next to, and the hypotenuse is across from the 90-degree angle. Now we're going to use the acronym we just discussed, SOHCAHTOA. So in order to find sine, we use SO, which means OH, because this represents sine of the opposite over the hypotenuse. So let's look at our triangle. Our opposite is going to be 4, and our hypotenuse is 5. So sine of A is equal to 4 over 5. Next, we're going to use cosine or ca. So cosine is represented by adjacent over hypotenuse. So our adjacent is going to be 3 over the hypotenuse, which is 5. Cosine of A is equal to 3 over 5. Lastly, we have tangent. Tangent is TOA, so that's opposite over adjacent. So my opposite is going to be 4 over my adjacent, which is 3. So tan of A is equal to 4 over 3. Don't forget to use SOHCAHTOA. Let's look at this next example. We have a right triangle, and here we have theta, and that represents our angle, our central angle. So let's label opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. So 6 is going to be my opposite, 8 is going to be my adjacent because it's touching the angle, and 10 is going to be my hypotenuse because it's across from the 90-degree angle. Let's not forget our acronym SOHCAHTOA. So to find sine of theta, we have OH, opposite over hypotenuse. My opposite is 6 over my hypotenuse, which is 10. Next, we have cosine, which is ca, adjacent over hypotenuse. My adjacent is 8. My hypotenuse is 10. Finally, I have tangent of theta, which is TOA, opposite over adjacent. My opposite is 6 over my adjacent, which is 8. You were able to find each trig ratio using SOHCAHTOA. Lastly, it's important to remember SOHCAHTOA. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent opposite over adjacent.